We're just about 6 days from the public release of the next Scream film, so today we're going to take a look back at its predecessor, as we review Scream 4, released in 2011. Much like the previous 3 films, Scream 4 was once again directed by Wes Craven and written by Kevin Williamson. It ended up being the last film that Craven ever directed, as unfortunately he passed away just a few months after it was publicly released. Neve Campbell, David Arquette, and Courtney Cox all returned in their roles from the previous film, and they added a whole bunch of new cast members including Emma Roberts, Hayden Panettiere, Anthony Anderson, Adam Brody, and Macaulay Culkin's little brother Rory. The film takes place 15 years after the events of the first film, where Sydney is going on a book tour until, you guessed it, murders start happening again. This film had some changes from the original trilogy, including using CGI for the first time. And while Scream 3 was dumbed down a bit because of events happening in the country at the time, at this point in 2011, most people had been pretty much desensitized to violence, especially in America, with all the mass shootings and stuff like that, so this was probably the goriest film of the franchise as a result. Social media was also in full bloom by the time this film came out, and that was used a lot in this. But were all those new things enough to make Scream 4 better than Scream 3 and maybe even help it live up to Scream 1 and 2? Well, we're going to find out right now as we take a look back at Scream 4, released in 2011. So our film begins with 2 girls, Sherry and Trudy, looking to watch Saw 4, before, you guessed it, they get the mysterious phone call. They're then attacked and killed by Ghostface until it's revealed they're actually in a film, Stab 6, being watched by 2 girls, Rachel and Chloe. Rachel tries to explain to Chloe why she doesn't like the Stab movies until Chloe stabs her to death, and turns out they're also in a movie within a movie, Stab 7. And Stab 6 and 7 were being watched by 2 other girls, Marnie and Jenny. Jenny then pretends to hear something upstairs to use the Ghostface voice to scare Marnie, until Marnie's line cuts out. When Jenny goes back downstairs, all the lights are out and Marnie's gone, and then she gets the phone call herself. Ghostface then throws Marnie's dead body through the window and begins chasing Jenny throughout the house. She tries to escape through the garage, but he breaks her back using the garage door and then stabs her to death into the title card. The next day in downtown Woodsboro, we meet Sydney and her new publicist Rebecca, who are there on the final stop of Sydney's book tour. We then meet up with Dewey and Gail, who are now married, and Dewey is the town sheriff. We then meet Jill Roberts, who's actually Sidney Prescott's cousin, as well as her friends Kirby and Olivia. Jill and Olivia then reveal that just last night they got threatening phone calls from the phones of Marnie and Jenny, the 2 girls killed the previous night. We then see Dewey talking with his deputy Judy, who clearly has a crush on him. Fun fact, Judy was played by Marley Shelton, who was in that awful Valentine movie I did last February. And then they get the call in on Marnie and Jenny's murders. Gail, meanwhile, is back at home trying to write a new fiction novel for the first time, and it's not going very well. Now at Woodsboro High, we meet 2 weird kids, Charlie and Robbie, who host the school's cinema club. Fun fact, Robbie was played by Eric Knudsen, who we've previously seen on the channel as Daniel in Saw 2. Jill also meets up with her ex-boyfriend Trevor, who she doesn't seem to want to have anything to do with anymore. Gail, meanwhile, tries to deal with her writer's block by going to Sydney's book club meeting. Dewey then shows up with the police because turns out they've traced a phone from the crime scene back to this location. They call the phone and it rings inside the trunk of Sydney's car alongside some blood in there. Dewey takes Sydney down to the police station to talk to her, while Judy feuds with Gail. Dewey tells Gail that he doesn't want her to get involved on the investigation, so she decides to go rogue herself. Sydney then reunites with Jill as her, Olivia, and Kirby came down to report those phone calls. Sydney then decides to stay the night at Jill's house with Jill, Kirby, and Jill's mother, Kate. The film then intentionally tries to set up a couple of possible suspects as Trevor got in the house through Jill's window, and Judy reveals that she actually knew Sydney from high school, but Sydney doesn't remember her. We've also got 2 cops, Anthony and Ross, stationed outside the house. As Kirby and Jill are watching Shaun of the Dead, they decide to prank call Olivia, who's just across the street. Jill then gets a call from Trevor's phone and Kirby answers to the Ghostface voice. The Ghostface claims that he's not Trevor and he's actually in the closet, but when Kirby opens the closet, there's no one there. He didn't specify which closet though, turns out he's actually in Olivia's closet across the street, and he stabs her to death. Sydney and Jill then go to the house to try to fight off Ghostface, but Jill gets stabbed in the arm and Sydney's able to subdue the Ghostface, but by the time the cops arrive, he's gone, because of course he is. Now at the hospital, Robbie and Charlie show up to record the scene, and they meet up with Gail. Robbie reveals to Gale that he live streams his entire life to the internet using some mini webcam he wears on his head, and Gale realizes that this whole new technology might be what the killer's using, so they decide to team up. As Sydney leaves the hospital, Rebecca raves to her about all this free publicity they're getting, and Sydney's like, dude, fuck you, you're fired. And as Rebecca's trying to leave the hospital, she's ambushed in the parking garage by the ghost-faced and promptly stabbed. Meanwhile, outside the hospital, Dewey is having a press conference telling everybody that everything's under control until Rebecca gets thrown off the roof. The next day after that, Sydney and Gale attend the cinema club where Robbie and Charlie reveal they're having their big stab-a-thon tonight, which is where they play all the stab movies consecutive, and Gale and Sydney realize that's probably where the killer is gonna strike next. Jill and Sydney decide to stay home that night, but Gale goes to the stab-a-thon to see what's going on, and she sets up cameras to record the scene. However, as she gets back in her car, someone in a ghost face mask starts disabling her cameras one by one. Gale then goes back to check her cameras and realizes that there's another camera watching her. She's been attacked by the ghost face killer who stabs her in the shoulder and throws her off a balcony just as Dewey arrives and scares him off. We now get our first hint that there might be two killers, as back at Jill's place around the same time, another Ghostface killer murders the two cops. Sydney gets a call from Ghostface and learns about Gale getting stabbed on the news, and then goes to check on Jill, who is no longer in her room. Sydney tells Kate and they can't get a hold of Jill, and then they're attacked by Ghostface. They're able to shut him out of the front door until he stabs Kate for the letterbox, killing her. Judy then shows up to see the carnage, but Sydney flees the scene in a car. Gale, meanwhile, is still alive and in the hospital, while Kirby, Jill, Charlie, Robbie, and for whatever reason, Trevor are all at Kirby's house. Robbie then gets very drunk and wanders outside, while Kirby makes a move on Charlie, and Trevor goes upstairs to see where Jill went. Robbie walks around the house and ends up at the front door, where he's attacked and murdered by Ghostface. Jill and Kirby meet up again and realize everyone else is missing, but hey, Sydney showed up, and there's Ghostface again. The two get separated from Kirby and Jill hides under the bed while Sydney leads the killer out on the roof. Sydney is just able to call Dewey for help right before she's knocked off the roof by Ghostface. Not the first time she's been knocked off a roof though, so she's fine. She then finds Kirby and the two of them lock themselves in the basement. Charlie then comes to the outside door with blood on his hands, but Kirby can't trust him so she doesn't let him in. He's then attacked by Ghostface and the outside lights go off. When the lights come back on, Charlie is still alive but duct taped to a chair. Kirby's then forced to answer movie trivia to free him while Sydney goes back upstairs to look for Jill. Kirby gets the trivia right and unties him, and then Charlie stabs her in the stomach, revealing him to be one of the killers. While we don't see Kirby again, it should be noted that she was still alive at the time he left her, but let's face it, she probably bled out. Sydney's then attacked by Charlie, who she's able to fend off until the other Ghostface gets involved, who is Jill. Yeah, what a fucking shocker. So what's the goal this time? Well, turns out they've been recording the whole thing, and they're gonna upload it to make a real-life movie and frame the murders on Trevor. So what's Jill's motive? Well, her motive is pretty fucking cringe, I'm not gonna lie. It's pretty bad. Her motive is literally that she was jealous of Sydney's fame, and her herself wanted to be famous, so she's doing this so she can be famous. That's it. That's the motive. Jill then executes Trevor, and instead of stabbing Charlie in the shoulder like they discussed, she stabs him right in the heart as she wants to be the sole survivor. She even stabs down Sydney as well, seemingly killing her. But then Jill almost completely makes up for that previous cringe monologue with a brilliant scene in which she maims herself to set up the crime. Like seriously, this might have been the best scene of the whole movie. This was very much well done. The police show up to see the carnage, and Jill is taken to the hospital as reporters gather around her, and she's like, oh my god, I'm famous. Seriously, that's a cringe-ass motive. She talks to Dewey in the hospital, and Dewey reveals to her that Sydney is still alive, so Jill heads over to Sydney's room. Dewey then goes back to Gale's room and mentions to Gale that Jill said they had matching shoulder wounds, and Gale's like, wait a minute, how did she know I was stabbed in the shoulder? And Dewey's like, oh shit. Jill then shows up at Sydney's room and starts attacking her just as Dewey arrives, and Jill beats him half to death with a fucking bedpan. Jill grabs his gun and aims at Gale, who just showed up, but Gale is saved by Judy, who tackles her over to bed. Judy then gives her gun to Jill, who shoots her down. Jill's then about to execute Gale until Sydney comes up from behind with the defibrillator and shocks her in the brain. Jill tries to get up one more time with a piece of glass before Sidney shoots her in the head, finally killing her. Oh, and also Judy's still alive. She was wearing a bulletproof vest, so that's handy. And to end the film, the media outside are making Jill famous, reporting her as a sole survivor, as Jill's dead body seems to form a smile. Also, forgot to mention this at the beginning like I usually do, but this film surprisingly did not do well at the box office. It had a budget of $40 million and only made 97.2, which was much low for the series. But speaking of the series, now that we've completed the first 4 films, let's pull up our Scream big board once again. So was this film as good as Scream 1 or 2? Not even close. Was this film better than Scream 3? Yes, but just barely. To be honest, it was a lot closer than I thought it would be. That cringe narrative of why Jill did the murders really brought it down a lot. There was a lot of good shit in this. The violence was not dumbed down at all. I liked a lot of the characters, especially Hayden Panettiere as Kirby. She did a tremendous job, but God, that motive was just bad. So it was better than Scream 3, but not by a lot. And these last 2 Scream films were a way couple leagues down from the first 2 films. But regardless, here's our final rankings, at least until Scream 5 comes out. Number 1, Scream 1. Number 2, Scream 2. Number 3, Scream 4. And number 4, Scream 3. Don't get me wrong, I liked Emma Roberts in this film. I don't think it was her fault, but God, that narrative was just bad. Like, I get it. They were trying to keep up with, social media and everyone wants to be famous nowadays. That was all the rave in 2011. I get it, but it's still cringe. It still wasn't good. It still wasn't a great excuse, even in modern context, to murder a multitude of people, including her own mother and her best friend and her cousin. Like, all because she wanted to be famous. You could have gone with the opposite, to be honest, and it would have made more sense. You could have said, oh, that Jill was resentful for all the negative media attention that Sidney brought her family, and she was tired of hearing about it, so she decided to take Sidney out so she wouldn't have to hear about it anymore. You could have gone with the obvious. And it's just, it wasn't a good twist. And it also doesn't have the excuse of being rewritten like Scream 3 did. And I'll tell you what, Scream 3 would have been better than this film if Scream 3 had gone with its original draft. Also, there's an alternate beginning to this film where Marnie and Jenny are killed in a much more brutal way, which is actually maybe the most brutal scene in the entire franchise, and they didn't even use it. And if you haven't seen that, I'd recommend looking it up on YouTube. But overall, this was a solid Scream film as a whole that could have done with a better plot twist, and hopefully Scream 5 pulls this up a little bit more. I have heard good things about Scream 5 early on though, so I guess we'll wait and see. But yeah, that's going to do it for my look back at Scream 4. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you join me right here on the channel next week for another movie review. But that's going to do it for me today. Thank you guys for watching. If you liked the video, be sure to leave it a like. If you want to follow any of my social media links, they're all in the description down below. Thank you all for all my patrons for supporting me and my channels. I appreciate you guys. With all that being said though, my name is Noah Taff. This has been my Scream look back at Scream 4. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye.